And joining us now on Pod is Life, as he does every week during the college football season. And obviously, we have to talk to him right now with all of the recent college football news, is our good friend of the show, Pete. Pete, welcome back. How are you today?
Harry, it's good to be back. It's good to be talking about college football. I'm doing really good. Uh, Obviously, we've got a fluid situation going on, but I'm excited for the season. Um, yeah, I'm doing really good. I'm excited. It's a weird year, but it's the best time of year in my opinion. We're turning to the fall.
The leaves are turning. The cookouts are starting to happen. We're going from the summer barbecues to the fall grilling. It's just a smoky flavor in the air. It's wonderful, and we're gonna we're not gonna be Debbie Downers, because I know you and I are both very excited about football. We talk about football a lot. But let's kind of set the scene for people who may have been like, wow, a lot's going on. About a week ago, you and I started texting because we're like, stuff's starting to happen. The schedules got released, and let's go even further than that. It comes out, Pete, that teams are going to only play in their conference. We're going conference only, maybe one or two non-conference games, but we're really paring back the schedule to limit the travel. What was your initial reaction to that? Because that really was the first kind of post-COVID college football news that we got.
Right. So my first reaction to that, I understood what they were trying to do, limit travel, that kind of stuff. I don't know how much it's really going to change anything, though. Like, for example, I'm just taking a Big Ten school in Nebraska. I'm from Nebraska, and that's just kind of one comparison that I've done. Nebraska was scheduled to play Cincinnati. Cincinnati was going to come to Nebraska and play. And I don't know how many miles that is exactly, but it's however many. But they canceled that game, but Nebraska is still going to go play at Rutgers in New Jersey, and that's 1,400 miles. So I understand that they're trying to limit travel, and it's interesting, but Nebraska's still going to travel twice as far as Cincinnati would have to go play. So like I said, I understood what they were trying to do. I don't think it really is going to do too much. I guess if their goal is to limit the number of people they come into contact with, it makes sense to take out some or all of the non-conference games. But I think it's definitely very interesting. And then another thing that stood out to me when that was all happening, I was getting a couple people asked me on Twitter, because obviously I'm a big Notre Dame fan. They're asking, what's the status of Notre Dame and all this? Because they're an independent school, and we've seen, we'll kind of get to some of the other independent schools when we get to conferences. But there was speculation from the beginning that Notre Dame was going to join the ACC, and all these people who have been saying that Notre Dame should join a conference, they finally got their wish. Notre Dame will be with the ACC. They'll have a chance to compete for the ACC championship. I think that's going to be really interesting to see as well. Those were some of the takeaways I took from kind of that first non-conference getting canceled or chopped situation.
And it made sense, right? Like from on a base level, you're like, okay, we're going to travel a little bit less. Sure. Like you said, there's a bunch of instances where it doesn't make a ton of sense. If we really were doing pure travel, we'd do something that I've always wished that college football every now and then would look at the map and say, is that team really in that conference? Like you said, like the Rutgers example for sure, a perennial Big Ten powerhouse. But you look at the map and you go, those schools, they don't look like they belong in the same geographic map. But it made sense. Like the press release was like, okay, we're gonna try to take a step in the right direction. So that happens. We get the schedules, Pete, and then 5 days after the schedules come out, the Big Ten announces no football in the fall. What kind of take us through what was going through your head? Because it was a 24-hour period where everyone was on Twitter. I know you were, I was, just constantly refreshing, and we're waiting because everyone was just kind of, it was happening in real time.
Man, that was one of the wildest days of Twitter that I can remember. I know Twitter's kind of a crazy place all the time, but I mean, my feed was going crazy during all that because I follow a lot of college football stuff. And for, 2 or 3 days before the official announcement was made, there was all this speculation, immediately everyone was kind of racing to be the first ones to say that the Big Ten was done. And then, the tide seemed like it was kind of turning. And then it comes out that it's official that the Big Ten, the Pac-12 were canceling their seasons. That followed the MAC and then the WAC are both not going to be playing fall football this year. My big thought process during all this is I'm just kind of amazed at the absence of like leadership and unity among the conferences. You'd never see something like this in professional sports. And I mean, objectively, college and pro sports are different, but there are leaderships and people in charge of the entire NFL, Major League Baseball, the NBA, stuff like that. But that just is absent in college sports, not just college football, but all college sports. We're seeing what's going to look like a Power 3 this year, and without the Big Ten and the Pac-12, and it's weird. It's just, I mean, we keep saying that these are unprecedented times, but it's definitely going to be interesting to see, that absence of Big Ten football. I know I love waking up in the morning. There's always a Big Ten game on first thing in the morning, and that's kind of the first thing I go to typically. So I'll really miss that. And obviously I'm located in the Midwest. I grew up a Nebraska fan. I'm living in Iowa now, so I'm going to be missing those two teams. Obviously Ohio State out of the mix. They're a perennial national championship contender. So that's going to be that. Ohio State and then Penn State, I think, are the two biggest, forces that we're going to be missing in the whole college football landscape this year. But it's definitely going to be interesting. And I'm very interested to see, they're planning for the spring for now, if that's going to happen. I am of the opinion that it doesn't seem very realistic with the NFL draft. I don't think the NFL is going to really want to change their schedule that much. And who knows if the whole pandemic is going to be, better than it is right now. So it's definitely going to be very interesting. We've never had a college football season like this. I'm still excited though. We're still getting the SEC and ACC. So obviously we're getting Alabama, Clemson, Georgia, LSU. We got the Big 12. We got Oklahoma, Texas, those teams. A lot of big national powers are still out there, and it's going to be fun to watch. But it is going to be disappointing to see, a lack of non-conference games, though, because those are, I think, where you really get to gauge where conferences stand against one another.
Right. And we would always talk like those first couple games of the year when it was these really marquee matchups between conferences. And we're like, oh, look at this. And, maybe Auburn's going to make some noise. And then they lose 3 games to 3 incredible teams. And we're talking about it the rest of the year. So
yeah,
definitely lose that. Pete, I want to harp back on one thing you said about the leadership, because I do think I've seen it every now and then. But Mark Emmert, the president of the NCAA, I do think everyone has a right, if you're involved in any college athletics whatsoever, to look around at the landscape and say, who's in charge? Because it does seem, the Big Ten makes their decision and they pull out. The Pac-12 makes their decision, they pull out. So now we're 2 of the Power 5 conferences are out. And Mark Emmert just 100% seems to be content with letting each individual conference make a decision. At which point, what is he there for if he's the governing body over everyone else, right? I mean, so I guess that's if you are a fan of an Ohio State and Iowa and et cetera, I do think some of it you're allowed to be upset with your own conference, whether that's right or wrong, and the medical reasons aside, you're allowed. I think as a fan, you're allowed to be like, man, I wish I could see my team play. But Absolutely. How much do you think people should be upset with the fact that you're looking at Mark Emmert and he basically said, he wiped his hands of everything and said, it's up to the conferences. They figure it out and they can fall on their own sword.
You kind of hit the nail on the head on what I was going to say about it. Is he's leaving the decision up to the conferences, and it's almost like, well, what is Mark Emmert there for? Like, what kind of decisions is he actually making? I mean, these are big decisions. These are, teams not playing. That's going to affect, schools, small towns, businesses, all that kind of stuff. So when it comes to these really, really critical decisions, you would think that in charge of the whole thing would, be taking the leadership, but he absolutely is wiping his hands clean of it. And it really does make me question, I don't know the specifics of his job and everything, but it really makes me wonder, like, well, if he's not going to make these kind of decisions, then what is he here for? And it kind of leads me to people are going to say what they're going to say about the NCAA. A lot of people have a lot of problems with it. I know I have some problems with it. Um, I think if they really want to improve the NCAA system, they need to make, Mark Emmert or whoever in charge, like, you know, be in charge of all of these conferences and, ensure that there's unity and cohesion between them so that, if something like this were to ever happen in the future, we're not looking at, it's Spider-Man meme with 5 different teams. They're all pointing
Right.
at each other, waiting for the other to make a decision. And, the Big Ten was hoping that they would make this decision and that others would follow. And the SEC was square on the other side saying, we're going to play and they're looking at the ACC. And then it seemed like it kind of came down to the Big 12.
Right.
And then they came out and said that they're going to play. So it's messy. It's crazy. And it really just makes me think that there should definitely be a little bit better leadership at the top.
For sure. The fact that, and I think several different reporters brought this up, the fact that the Big Ten cancels fall football without a spring plan. Like they talked about playing in the spring, but it's Jeff Brom from Purdue who has to put out the plan. And you have to think that Jeff Brom's not the guy. His job isn't to come up with the spring plan for the Big Ten network. But yet he did. He did because no one else did. So you'd have to imagine at some point, right, that you would think that Mark Emmert and the NCAA would step in then and say, okay, if there's going to be multiple conferences playing in the spring, let's set up the guidelines, or let's kind of figure out what the scheduling looks like. And and maybe they are still working at it. Hopefully, I really hope that they are, because I think as smart as Jeff Brom is, and I'm sure his plan probably would work, I think that we probably need somebody above Jeff Brom's logistically to put the entire schedule together. But that is where we're at, which I think is a good microcosm for 2020 in a nutshell, when you have the coach of Purdue saying, yeah, you know what, here's my schedule plan because I haven't seen one yet.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you just hit it on the head there again. Like they should have had a plan before they had made these decisions. Maybe if that was the case, we would have seen all 5 conferences, all 10, I guess, Division I AA or FBS, I should say, programs would maybe all have gone to spring then if there was, a set in stone plan. But it seems like they're just kind of waiting, hoping that a plan is made. But it's all in flux right now. And it's going to be interesting to see if a plan even comes out. I mean, in a couple months, if there's still no plan, we're going to be looking at each other like, I don't think that these conferences are going to be playing. They can't really wait too long. I mean, there's a lot of implications here. Kids going to the pros, kids graduating, and the prospect of playing 2 seasons in one calendar year, 8 months, 10 months, whatever it is. That is another interesting thing for me. They talk about player safety and all that stuff, and it seems a little bit problematic for me. To see 2 football seasons in the same calendar year. I think it would be a lot of fun. I would love to watch it. Having football for basically a year straight would be awesome. But I would be concerned about the safety and health of the players.
Well, speaking of the players, Pete, let's talk quick about what happens for some of these players that aren't going to get to play this fall. There was probably we had the wild 24 hours where we're like, football happening, not happening, who's in, who's out, everyone's out, everyone's in. The players come out with their hashtag We Want to Play movement. They get senators to jump in. The President of the United States jumps in on it, and we're kind of like, okay, are we turning the tide? And so this all happens. And then the next question that came about after we learned that the Big Ten was out was, is anyone going to jump ship? And it does seem like now we've turned the corner on that. Nebraska has officially said that they're staying in the Big Ten, but there was, again, about a day and a half where Ohio State, Penn State, Nebraska, it did seem like they were trying to weigh the options to leave. What did you make of that? And do you think that is there any, obviously 2020, everything's on the table at this point because, knock on wood, who knows what the hell is going to happen next. But is there any chance you think that in behind boardrooms, Ohio State and Penn State are still looking at the table and they're like, could we play with these guys? I mean, how much trouble is worth it to play football this year?
Well, it seems like Kevin Warren, the Big Ten commissioner, came out and said that he's not going to allow that. I think if a team was to leave the conference for a year, even if it was a team like Ohio State, the powerhouse of the conference in football, you would hope that all these teams are on the same level playing field in terms of their standing in the Big Ten. Nebraska I found to be a very interesting case because they were in the Big 12. I grew up in Nebraska as a Nebraska fan. Growing up, I remember them being in the Big 12. Those are the rivalries that I really remember, and even though it's been 10 years, I still cherish those rivalries. Oklahoma, Missouri, and Colorado, who are both out of the Big 12 as well. All of those, I thought it would have been very exciting. I'm disappointed that the Big Ten came out and made that statement that if a team was to leave, that they would probably be kicked out of the conference. And I think that because they did that, I think Ohio State and Penn State and Nebraska and whoever else are done looking at that. I think they really were looking at doing that. And I think it would have some serious ramifications if they tried to push forward with that. It would look more like a permanent move. And it would have been fun to see, Nebraska, Ohio State, Penn State in the Big 12. Those would have been fun games. Oklahoma versus Ohio State in the regular season would have looked like a non-conference game that we're used to. It would have been fun, and I wish it could have happened, but at this point, I don't see it happening.
Well, and I think part of it too is so we think everyone's staying put. And I agree. I think they really tried to squash that, and I think the only one that really could potentially get away with it is Ohio State if they really tried to swing their weight. But even then, I think this goes much bigger than sports. If you're looking at if the Ohio State president has to look at his athletic director and say, hey, you know what, like it's bigger than just football.
Right.
We need to stay in the Big Ten for a variety of reasons. That being said, let's talk about the player side. We kind of mentioned the player empowerment of Trevor Lawrence from Clemson, kind of leading the charge, and a lot of players putting their voice behind wanting to play. And so what happens, do you think, now for those players? What do you think happens to players that aren't going to get to play in the fall in terms of A, eligibility, or B, do you think any of them are going to try to head south as we kind of get closer to the actual season, or is that more of a kind of a pipe dream? And at this point, most rosters are already constructed.
Right. I think, I was having a conversation the other day about, I had someone reach out to me and say, hot take, I think Justin Field is going to leave Ohio State and come down to Georgia. And I don't know that I've seen anything about transfer rules with all this coming out. I think it's too fresh for there to be official rules. So for, a player like Justin Fields, who's, got a future in the NFL, who's a top prospect, who's, he's only had one season at Ohio State, and they were looking like a top 5 team this year. I think it would be really fun. I do think it's a little bit of a pipe dream at this point, just because, there's no rules for this. We don't have any, standards on what is and is not acceptable. And for a player to transfer, it's August 13th today. The season starts for some conferences a month from, yesterday or whatever it is. So I think it's, cutting it too close. I think if these teams had made that decision, at the beginning of the pandemic, beginning of quarantine, then maybe we're looking at that being more realistic. Now, when you're talking about eligibility, I did see that the NCAA had come out and said that players who do not play this year, who opt out, or players who don't get to play if there's not a spring season, I believe it was, that they would gain an extra year of eligibility. And I think that's the absolute right move. My question is, how is that going to affect scholarships and, the number of kids on a team and, all the real specifics of stuff like that that's more than just, the game that's on the field. There's a lot of implications with all that kind of stuff. And, I think we're going to continue to get more and more news about that. But it's definitely going to be very interesting. And I do appreciate that the NCAA came out and that they're, supporting player safety in that way by letting these players opt out and keep a year of eligibility.
Right. It seems like that's a good point. It's like kind of like the bare minimum the NCAA could do, but knowing them, like it still was a question mark until they actually did it. But now that it's been done, there are a lot of like preceding questions for players that maybe were on scholarship, but is, have already signed their national letter of intent, but now is that spot up in the air because some people are going to stay, or because this season's a wash, and then are they in limbo, or so there is kind of a cascading effect that we'll have to keep an eye on. But Pete, switching gears a little bit, we've talked about the players, we've talked about the conferences that aren't playing, and one of those conferences is the Pac-12. And I thought it was interesting. The Pac-12 came out and they actually released their report that the doctors had put together, which I thought was, at least in their case, I think it helped their fan base kind of have a better understanding, because some of the reports from the Pac-12 meeting was that the presidents basically got the presentation from the doctors and all came back and were like, holy crap, like we can't play, like if you heard what our doctors said. And so they released the report, and really the big thing that I took from it, and I'm not sure if you saw it or not, but the big thing from the report was just the unknowns and the long-term health effects. But I'm curious what you think. Then the counter to that has been the Big 12, the SEC, and the ACC. All their commissioners came out and pretty much said, "Hey, look, we think we're going to do okay." So it's one of those things where obviously they don't have the same doctors the Pac-12 has, but it is just kind of an interesting spot where I think the Pac-12 put their best foot forward and said, "Hey, we're letting the medicine decide this. Here's what all the medicine says, and we're not comfortable with it." And that now, again, fingers crossed. Hopefully, everything goes well. And the worst thing that happens is we look back and say, "Wow, the Big Ten was too cautious." And if that's the outcome, that's an awesome outcome. But should anything go bad, I do think that. Do you agree with me that will then be put in contrast with? Well, the Pac-12 listened to their doctors and nobody else did.
Yeah, I do. And, the Pac-12 releasing that statement, I really appreciated the transparency, because the Big Ten was very vague, about the reasons why. They mentioned health and safety, and I think a lot of it was really liability for them, which, that's fair. If that's the reason why, that's understandable. Because of the unknown, like you said, and kind of contrast what the Pac-12 did with coming out with their report. I saw that the ACC said that their doctor said, we're confident that we can play and keep these players healthy. So, like you said, these doctors aren't the same. And I wish that all of the conferences had been as transparent about it as the Pac-12. Maybe if we had seen these reports, even in the ACC, SEC, Big 12, maybe we as fans and spectators would be saying, I don't know, maybe we shouldn't be playing this. Obviously, there's a lot of people who, aren't going to feel that way regardless of what comes out. But I feel like if there had been a little bit more transparency by the rest of the conferences, we'd have a better understanding, and I think that we'd be able to, pick a side, I guess, more appropriately and with all the information that we could.
And I think part of that too, this is the little for everyone at home to keep an eye on with the transparency, is going to also be at the school level. What does this look like, right? Because for instance, we see the NBA publishes all of their coronavirus reports, and thankfully the bubble stayed intact. And go figure, when you close down an area and nobody's in or out, go figure, that works. MLB, not so much, but same thing. Everything's public. They let us know, and there's reports. There's been some reports from Florida State where players are saying that testing protocols aren't being followed, and people are being basically yelled at by the administration when they say that they have tested positive. They're supposed to stay quiet, and players don't know who's been positive and not, and they haven't. Essentially, this is from players and from some early reporting, and so that's something that probably we're going to have to keep an eye on this whole year, right? You'd imagine the whole idea of who's going to play this weekend could be up in the air up until kickoff, because maybe for a competitive advantage, maybe because they don't want their school to look bad. But a lot of these people may keep these tests close to the vest because, they don't probably have they don't probably need to put these numbers out the way that professional sports leagues do.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think that definitely is something we're going to have to keep an eye on. I just saw that, I think either earlier today or yesterday, the Florida State thing. And, I think that it was we definitely heard the players saying we want to play. That was, it was trending on Twitter. The biggest names in college football were coming out with that, and it seemed like the overwhelming majority did want to play. But I think these players from Florida State and from wherever else, and I'm sure that we are going to get more of those reports. Um, it's almost like social media is kind of quelling their voices a little bit, telling them to be quiet and stuff like that. If more and more reports come out like that, maybe we see all of the conferences go away for the year and just say that we're going to play in the spring, just punt. It's definitely going to be something to keep an eye on. And I definitely think that the "we want to play" was very loud. I don't know if it was the majority or not, but it's definitely going to be an interesting thing to see going forward. And I think we're going to continue to see that, especially in the next week or two.
Right, right. And I think part of it too was, like you said, the "we want to play" movement had a lot of marquee players. And I know personally it was like all, it led Sports Center for, for that day, and the following day, all the follow-up reactions to it. So definitely got the media traction that
Yeah.
that kind of helped give it more momentum. And I mean, for a lot of these athletes, I'd imagine, this may shock everyone listening, not a collegiate athlete, but I would imagine that at the height of their sport, and in their, profession, that, it is student athlete. But for a lot of these guys, like, this is, this is what they do. This is what they have spent the majority of their life doing, especially the really high caliber athletes that, they want to be out there. They want to play. And
Yeah.
I think if you want to point fingers, there's a whole slew of places you could point your finger as to why we're even in this situation and why college football is, unfortunately on the chopping block. But for them right now, I think that, like you said, just sending out a tweet, they're like, hey man, like, I just want to play, which I totally get that as somebody who has
Yeah.
spent an inordinate amount of time in his apartment over the last 10 weeks. Like, I totally get that. As long, and hopefully everything works out, and that's really what I'm rooting for more than any
Right.
team and individual. But speaking of rooting for teams, Pete, I can't believe we made it this long before diving into it. You mentioned it. Notre Dame is going to be a part of the ACC this year. And now it's time for in-depth schedule analysis. Are you concerned? How do you feel? Wake Forest might be a sneaky good team this year. Is Notre Dame up for it?
Notre Dame is absolutely up for it. And Notre Dame, they still have an open non-conference game now that Western Michigan was their scheduled game. They pulled out with the MAC. They have an open spot. I don't know if it's going to get filled or not. We're cutting it really close to the season, although we did see Iowa State schedule Louisiana earlier this week, maybe even earlier today. Excuse me, but going to the ACC schedule, I'm excited. You've been seeing me tweet about it. We've got Clemson on the schedule in the middle of the season. Wake Forest is going to be sneaky good. Louisville is going to be interesting. Florida State's on the schedule as well. It's going to be interesting to see how they are. But I think Notre Dame, they're returning 6 offensive linemen who have played meaningful starts. I think that between the 6 of them, they have 115 career starts. They look like they're going to be one of the best offensive line units in the country. They have a veteran quarterback in Ian Book coming back who, he has college football playoff experience. He's played in big games. A lot of them have been, some of them have been pretty close. Some, we don't have to get too deep into that. But their playmakers will be an interesting it'll be interesting to see what they can do this year. They lost a lot of talent. Cole Kmet and Chase Claypool going to the NFL. They have a lot of young guys. They have a transfer from Northwestern playing receiver. He's got a crazy long name that I don't know how to pronounce. I'm not going to try to. I think Notre Dame is going to be very successful this year. Realistically, I see, if they find this non-conference game, it's probably not going to be, a marquee name. I would expect them to go 10-1 at worst, with that loss possibly being to Clemson. And I think that's going to be a closer game than we even think. Clemson lost T. Higgins, and then they lost Justin Ross for the year, their other big-time receiver. They're returning Travis Etienne at running back. He's going to be probably the best running back in college football this year. But the ACC is going to be interesting. I think there's some sneaky teams, Wake Forest, like you said, Florida State. But I think I think most people are expecting it to be Notre Dame and Clemson. And the interesting thing in the ACC this year is that there's no divisions. It's just the two teams with the best record are going to be in that ACC championship game. I'm excited, and you know, we've had all these people who have been saying Notre Dame should join a conference for years, and for years Notre Dame tried to, and then they established themselves as independent. And I just think that it would be so dang funny if Notre Dame walks into the ACC, comes in, maybe loses to Clemson in the regular season, goes on, beats them in the ACC championship game, and gets to college football playoff, do whatever from there. And then, out they go next year. I mean, assuming everything's back to normal, back to independency. And now they've got an ACC crown. The defending ACC champs are now independents. I just think that would be hilarious. And I mean, obviously I'm hoping it happens, but I'm very excited to see Notre Dame and Clemson play this year. I think the ACC is going to be a very fun league, a little bit different than usual. Regardless of all the other differences, it's going to be fun.
And yeah, the irony of joining a conference for 1 year, winning the conference, and then walking away and never having to truly defend your crown because you're like, oh, we won. We've won the ACC every year we've been in the ACC is exactly. Phenomenal and would be peak Notre Dame.
It would be a very Notre Dame move for that to happen, and I know that would make people mad, and that would just make that obviously Notre Dame winning it would make me happy, but the fact that it would be making so many people mad would make me very happy as well.
Pete, let's keep looking ahead. Let's look into your crystal ball for me, your college football crystal ball, and then we're looking forward. Dabo Swinney came out and said, he doesn't think it takes a whole lot off the fastball, that it's only 3 of the Power 5 conferences, which I think we can agree that we would prefer 5 out of 5, of course. But we look ahead, we figure everything out. We go through the season. What does a pandemic playoff look like? We've only got 3 conferences. Is it something that at the end we're like, oh wow, it's is it just going to be the ACC? Is it going to be, how weird is it going to be? Here we go. Here's the question: how weird is it going to be if we get to the pandemic playoff and there's only 3 conferences and the Big 12 is still not in
it? You mean if we get 2 ACC teams and 2 SEC teams?
Yes.
Oh man, it would be very, very funny to me. Oklahoma's always a contender. They've been in it so many times, 3 or 4 times they've been in it. But
always a bridesmaid, never a bride.
Exactly. That's well said. Well said. I think it would be very funny. Oklahoma, it's going to be interesting to see. We've seen them have 3 different quarterbacks in 3 years. 2 of them winning the Heisman. This Spencer Rattler, their quarterback this year, I don't know much about him. I haven't seen him play much. I think it's going to be exciting to see what he does this year. A lot of people are really sold on Oklahoma. I think there's a lot of unknown about them. They lost their quarterback, their, CeeDee Lamb. They lost a lot, and that defense was just atrocious. We saw LSU hang 100 on them. So that's a concern for me. I don't know what their defense is going to look like this year. If it's going to, sometimes getting a lot of guys back isn't necessarily a good thing. But if a Big 12 champ, has 2 losses for whatever reason, I think it's very possible that we could see 2 SEC and 2 ACC teams, or ordinarily you maybe throw teams like UCF in the conversation. And I'm not exactly sure what the AAC, what their schedule is going to look like yet. There hasn't been, there's a lot in flux still. But I definitely think that it's going to be just the Power 3 conferences this year that are going to be involved. And if it gets to the point where we have 3 strong conference champs, then we're obviously going to be double dipping, if Alabama wins the SEC and Georgia comes up right there, or potentially the same thing in the ACC with Notre Dame or Clemson winning it and the other one being right there, there is a strong, strong chance we're going to see 2 teams from one of those 2 conferences in there. And it's going to be fun. And, obviously I think we're missing a team, Ohio State. Obviously they play a game for a reason, played all the games for a reason. I think going in before all this happened, I was expecting Ohio State to be there. I thought that they were going to be one of the strongest teams in the country. But from the Big Ten, I mean, other than Michigan State in I think the first year of the playoff, we haven't seen a team other than Ohio State be there. And the Pac-12, well, I mean, it's kind of the Power Four and Pac-12. It seems like a lot of times. Oregon would have been a competitor, I think, for sure. So it's unfortunate that they're not going to be able to, play this year. But it's going to be fun to see probably two SEC or ACC teams in the finale.
And one last question for your crystal ball here, Pete. Let's fast forward to 2021, fall 2021, in the new normal. We're back. It's great. People will gather outside, and they don't have to be 6 feet apart.
No
masks. What would be the perfect matchup to kick off the 2021 football season? And I'm just picturing the opening shot of a crowded college mall on college game day. What are you waking up and tuning into to see everybody back out there?
Well, okay, so I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, and this is not my answer. I mean, obviously, you would say teams like Clemson or Alabama, but Clemson's going to lose a lot after this season. Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne, Justin Ross will probably go pro as well. They're going to be missing a lot. I haven't looked that far ahead yet in terms of what they're going to look like, but I think that the ideal matchup for the beginning of 2021 would be to include Ohio State because they're the perennial power in the Big Ten. So I'm going to say Ohio State, and I think Alabama. I think Ohio State versus Alabama because Alabama is just they're a machine. They lose 10 guys and then they bring 10 better guys in every year. And they haven't won a national championship in a couple of years now, but they're always right there, and they're a dynasty. So I think including a team like Ohio State, who's not going to be in the conventional season, the fall season this year, is going to be kind of a must because they're one of the most watched teams. They're one of the most popular teams, and Alabama is just the perennial dynasty in college football right now. You could argue Clemson's right there, but Alabama's won more national championships than they have. So I'm going to say Alabama versus Ohio State, and the game is going to be either in Atlanta or Jerry World.
We've spent some time together. I knew you were going that direction. I could see Jerry World in the back of your head. So book your tickets now. 2021, start of the fall football season. Ohio State, Alabama, Jerry World, or Atlanta. A little caveat there at the end, but we'll let you have it. We'll let you stay with that one because Mercedes-Benz Stadium, they're going to try to show that off the first second they can.
Of course.
Pete, you've been awesome with your time. Thank you so much for joining us. We will definitely continue to stay in touch as the college football season progresses. It's going to be a weird season. I'm still excited about it. Still looking forward to it. As things continue to kind of unfold, last parting thoughts here. What else should people be on the lookout for as kind of the dust continues to settle here? What else should we be kind of keeping an eye
on? I think that we should be keeping an eye on, players in these Power 3 conferences who might choose to opt out and potentially high-level players. I think we could see some guys opt out because it is going to be an unconventional season. Before the Big Ten even announced their decision, Micah Brown, he's like a top 5 projected pick. He announced that he was not going to play. There's a Virginia Tech player. I think he was the number 1 preseason rated corner back. He opted not to play. I think we're going to continue to see guys like that, opt out. So I don't think a guy like Trevor Lawrence or Travis Etienne is going to make that decision, but there's going to be some guys who are important to these teams leaving. And, I would keep an eye out for the Big 12 scheduling. There's going to be some non-conference games, and I believe the AAC, the American Conference, is going to have an 8-4 season, or 8-4, 8-3, 8 conference games, 3 non-conference. We could see some teams like Memphis or UCF get in there with those Big 12 teams that still need some scheduling. So we could find, for as little non-conference as there's going to be, there's still a lot unknown, and I think we could get some fun matchups early on in the season. So keep an eye out for that.
The Bearcats too, Pete. Bearcats out of the AAC with Luke Fickle at the helm still. Who
Oh
knows?
yeah,
Who knows?
Bearcats, baby.
So it could be a big year for the AAC. That's all I heard.
UCF national champions.
Maybe. Pete, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate your time. We will be in touch. Thanks again.
Thank you, Harry. I'm excited for the season.